It's a snowy day at the shop today. Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Craig and welcome back to the shop. Yeah, so I've been kind of, scratching my head here a little bit trying to figure out, what video do I do here on this snowy day here in Atlantic, Canada. So yeah, I'm willing to hear any ideas you might have.
What about dust collection?
What about dust collection?
Hey sir, what about dust collection? What about dust collection?
So dust collection it is then, I guess. Yeah, so I think it's one of those issues that we all kind of fight with, and especially in smaller shops like this. I'm in a 2-bay garage here, so I mean, it's for some guys this is probably a massive shop. I know a few fellows doing a business in a shed, which is pretty impressive to me. But for most of us, yeah, this is our typical kind of shop. I guess would be your garage at home. So for me, dust collection, I guess, is handled in, let's say, 3 main ways. Really, as we all started with shop vacs, are probably the most commonly used way, I guess. And if you have the budget, they're really fancy dust ones, from Merca and Festool and those guys. Second would be large scale dust collection, which I do have here as well. And thirdly, it would be actually ceiling mounted. Actually, there's one right here. A ceiling mounted dust collector, which basically just grabs dust out of the air. So maybe we'll look at those 3 separately. I mean, I have all 3 set up here in the shop. For me, that's kind of how it's been for a while now, over a year, I guess I've been running all of them. So maybe we'll kind of break them down one by one. So yeah, let's do that. Shop vacs. Yeah, so I actually have 2 here in the shop. I have one that I keep under my bench here at all times. I do really like 90% of my work ends up getting done on this work table, which is just a 4-foot by 4-foot piece of fir. Now I built it the exact same height as my table saw, so it basically becomes my outfeed table. When working alone, that's very handy. A lot easier to support stuff, and so it's just maybe just a touch lower than the table saw, just so nothing kind of fetches up as I'm using it. And so underneath this, I always have actually a Craftsman shop vac that was given to me from a friend. And so it's the typical shop vac 2.5-inch hose. And I found, even after installing a large scale dust collection system, I still use my shop vac for most of my planing. And the main reason for that is, as I'll kind of show you in a few minutes, the chips I find, like with a large scale dust collector I have a chip separator. But it's quite a job to actually empty it, because there's a lot of stuff to move around. You've got to kind of support the main cyclone on above it and everything else to get the bin out. And I found from doing this over and over again, it's actually, I find, still simpler just to put a shop vac on my planer, plane a bunch of boards. When the shop vac gets full, you hear the sound change from the vacuum changing. Shut it off, dump it into a big garbage bag, and just close it back up and keep going. It's super fast. So I can empty it out, in 30, 40 seconds. Whereas if I was doing the large scale dust collector, it's honestly probably a half-an-hour job to get that thing emptied out. And the other thing I find with larger chips, especially with with planers, my jointer, even actually the lathe, the way my dust collection is set up, you can see, I think I'm pointing right at it there. There's one hose hang which is going to my sander. It's got to pull the chips vertically to the top of the ceiling, and I'm in a 10-foot ceiling garage, because it's kind of a step down from the rest of the house. So it's got to pull the chips vertically all the way up, and then across the garage, and then into the separator, and then into the bin. And I found that I've had a little issue with clogging and not really pulling chips as fast as it should, so on and so forth. So honestly, for the money and for the practicality of it, it's pretty hard to beat a shop vac. Especially if it's given to you from a friend, like this one is free. So I use it for a considerable amount of stuff, mainly, and it's also good even just clean a bench in between doing stuff. The other shop vac I have, which is a rigid one I picked up at Home Depot quite a while back, it actually sits below my CNC table. So that one there, I'll switch over here, positions here, and we'll show you that one. So here on the CNC, basically the way it works is I've got a shop vac sitting below the table, which goes into a separator here on this little Home Depot bucket. And then from the separator, it actually goes to the CNC. So there's a hose that overhangs here that sits above, and that goes on to the dust booth. that actually, with magnets, goes on top of the, that hooks onto the CNC as it goes. I found this a pretty practical way. Probably one of the big differences here too, same situation. I mean, I could run probably hose across for my main dust collector, but that would mean, you know, probably 20 feet of run, and that's quite a bit. So with this, with the CNC, the one thing about it is that the chip size is very, very dependable. It's always the exact same size chip, unlike say my lathe, where you're getting these long curls come off, as well as very, very fine dust when you're doing sanding. This guy's always the same. So I'll just open up the collector here. Take the, pop these hoses off here. So on this stuff, you can see here, I'll bring it up nice and close. That's basically the size of every chip that comes off that. And that's mainly because it's using spiral blades, upcut spirals. And so I'm using a 1/4 inch. So the chip size is pretty much universal all the time. And as you can see in the cover here, now that I'm out of the way, there's basically just, this is a super cheap setup. So, I mean, the bucket's $5 from Home Depot. That cover, I think, it's under $20 on Amazon. If you're in the US, it'd probably be closer to 15. Super simple. So the hose from the vacuum fits directly into one port. And I've just got a pipe clamp on the other one. And I mean, obviously with suction of the vacuum, it kind of keeps all those pipes together anyway. It'd be different if you were pushing air out, it might pop it apart. And that's super effective. So the shop vac, I honestly have never, since I've been using the CNC, which I'm probably 6 months in or so, I've never rolled that never rolled the vacuum out to do any kind of emptying. Everything gets caught in that, as long as you kind of keep up with it, because if once it hits a certain point, then it's just going to go directly to the vacuum. But I check it, you know, every couple of hours probably of CNCing. And then it's, again, cover pops off. I've got a little strap with a clip around there. I just unclip that, walk over, dump it in the bag, put it back, and then right back to work. So I find in a lot of cases the shop vac really is the most practical way, because it really is the quickest. I've got 2 main shop vacs. I even have a small one that I use sometimes because you don't want to unhook these ones to, say, vacuum your car. So I have a small shop vac sitting in my basement that I use for just, you know, utilitarian uses around the home. So, you know, embarrassingly, I have 3 shop vacs, and I still look at them when they go on sale. I can't help myself. I'm always thinking, like, where else could I use a small shop vac? Would be so handy to have for whatever reason. Can never seem to have enough shop vacs, I guess is probably my thought around it. Yeah, so next on we'll go to the large scale dust collection that I have here in the shop. So here we are at the main dust collector I have. So as you can see here, I've got it basically on a shelf on my wall. And that's really, so on below it, I can actually fit the cyclone. So essentially the way the system works is, as you can see here, this is just your typical 4-inch drain hose. No hard 90s, everything's 45, so which helps, you know, with some kind of, with the possible clogging. I guess actually I was gonna say there's 90s in the end, but actually those are all 45. So I've got 3 main drops. The one I use the most, honestly, is the one for the sander, so I'm mostly collecting pretty fine particle dust. Everything kind of comes up. As you can see here, I've got one more coming over and down into the miter saw with a flexible hose. Back over here. And so basically everything gets pulled in by this, but it's getting pulled to the cyclone first. So from the cyclone, you can go to the top here. As you can see off the top, that's what's actually going to the dust collection unit. Comes to the top cyclone. Everything gets pulled into these hoses. So the lower hose with the blast gate is going to the table saw, as you can see underneath here. And then the top hose connects into that main system. So that's basically the main trunk line, I guess. So everything hits this separator, spins out, and then as you can see, basically falls into this can below, which is on wheels. So for me to actually empty this out, I have to unhook the latches around that can, basically kind of jack this up, which you can see I've actually got a bungee cord here holding it, which is just to help me when I go to empty it, and I've got a little cord hanging piece of strap on the other side to hold it up. And that's essentially just to sort of aid in that. And there's actually, if I can get here low enough for you to see, there's actually a little window on the side which allows you to see how full it's getting, and actually I can kind of see that it's touching the corner, so it's almost due for empty. Now, I mainly use the dust collector for my sandings, for the fine dust off the back of the sander. So I'm sure inside that can is probably quite dense from using that fine dust. It's fairly noisy. The only thing with dust collection is you can see a set of muffs here that are my spares. So if I'll crank it on, which I've got it wired to a little switch here, so it's just easy to get to. So yeah, pretty noisy overall. But again, normally when I'm working, I've got muffs on, so it's not really a big deal. I, wear hearing protection for almost everything. Probably the only issue I have with the large scale dust collector is, it's one of those situations that we all kind of find ourselves in quite often in smaller shops is, I didn't buy the cheapest one that they had. This is a Craftex, would be from Busy Bee Tools here in Canada. I think it's maybe the third from the bottom kind of thing. It's, I think, as large as I could go while staying with 110 voltage, so with a regular wall plug kind of power. I really kind of wish now that I'd figured out a way to maybe save up a little longer, maybe go to the 221. But that poses its own set of problems. Like for me, the garage is on the, facing my house, the garage is on the right-hand side of my home. My panel and my service entrance for electricity is on the absolute far side of my house. So to run a 220 circuit, I don't have a sub panel in my garage. So I'd have to run a 220 circuit basically the entire length of my home to run that, or try to either tap off the heating circuit in here or something else. So all that gets it's a bit janky doing it that way. So it'd have to be in the attic running wire, all that kind of stuff. So it's trying to find that middle ground, I guess, of affordability, and honestly, it's a lot of hassle to run that. It's going, if you were going to build a shop from scratch and you kind of had those choices, obviously you'd be doing things very different from the get-go. You'd be wiring 220 for dust collection, putting it in a, maybe in the most practical corner hidden away. Ideally, I'd love to have a shed hooked on the back of this house, on the back of my garage, that had just dust collection in it, so I could, run power to it and let it be as noisy as it wants to be, and it wouldn't bother me. But overall, it works pretty well. So typically, my day-to-day shop vac runs when I'm doing planing, when I'm running the jointers all on the shop vac, and then obviously just general cleanup kind of as I'm working. Any sanding I do, I run a flexible hose off of the 4-inch line that runs into the back of my sander. That runs the entire time I sand. I find that's the one thing, especially, the more you do this, you realize, like, it really does feel sometimes like sanding becomes 80% of the job. Honestly, it's the least fun part as well. But after, you're trying to get that dust out of your nose at the end of the day, and even wearing a mask is kind of uncomfortable, I find, if you're doing it a lot. So dust collection can go a long way. When I first got into this, the big thing I noticed too is that, the place becomes almost unbearably filthy in a short amount of time, because there just ends up being like, a half an inch of fine particulate on everything. And this is my garage and shop, so we still store things out here. I've got camping gear, I've got, seasonal things. And so, when you're going to load stuff in to go for a camping trip, and you've got to try to, cut through all this dust and wash everything down, it does become a bit of a hassle. And, tracking it into your house. You kind of go in and out, and it's hard to keep it off your boots. So, dust collection became pretty important for me, is just trying to get some of this stuff under control, I guess. Tripping over my words here. Yeah, so that basically handles the main parts of, I guess, the day-to-day. And so in the dust collector, I should say, too, also goes off table saw and miter saw, both run off that as well. The miter saw, I've got it running basically where the bag would go on a miter saw. I don't find it works that great. I'm sure a lot of it depends on the saw. This is a pretty cheap saw. It's a 12-inch saw, which is nice, but it's just a Mastercraft, so in Canada, Canadian Tire version. Pretty typical kind of cheap Chinese saw. I think on sale it's like $300. So again, $300 for a 12-inch miter is really good for a compound miter, but not the best saw going. And so even with dust collection running and the vacuums going, there's a lot of chips that kind of just come off the back, and that's again one of those things that feels impossible to ever get that perfect. The option would be is to build a complete box around the back of the saw and then have it maybe venting out of the bottom, so the dust falls to the bottom and then it kind of gets sucked away to the dust collection through there. That might be something I'll do in the future. I'm sure there'll be kind of a shop redo at some point where I'm going to start wanting to move things around and make things maybe work a little bit better. Yeah, and the other big piece, I guess, after this one would be how you handle the dust that doesn't get caught by those two things. Other than what's on the counters and what kind of comes off that you can't handle, shop vac adds that. The other big one is just the airborne dust that happens after you're done working. So You know, the dust collector works pretty well for clearing up most of the things that come off of the back of the sander, but there's always going to be that airborne dust. And also, even, you know, when you're getting ready to put a finish on, the first thing all of us do is you grab your air hose and you blow off that last bit of dust. You know, end of the day, you're blowing off your shirt and your face, and I wouldn't recommend doing that, but we all do it anyway. Even we know we're not supposed to do it, but we all do it. And then you basically launch all of that fine dust, gets launched back into the air. So by the time you come out the next day, there's no dust in the air, but everything gets another coat of dust on it. So that leads us to, I guess, the part 3 is how do you handle the dust? It's just kind of floating through the air all the time. And that takes us to our ceiling mounted dust collection. So for me, I went with one of the cheaper options, which is the Amazon option of Wen. I'm not sure the size of this guy. I don't really think it has a model on it. Not that I can see from close up. Maybe we can figure that out after. But pretty simple unit. It basically just hangs from 4 chains off the ceiling, and it works on a pretty simple principle, which is it just basically circulates the air around, and it has a set of filters on one end and a blower on the back. It pulls air through the filters, and then the dust gets trapped in those filters. So there's kind of like a heavier filter with larger holes on it first, and then behind that there's actually like more of a fine filter. I'm about due to take them down and take them outside and blow them off. I can tell that they're starting to get clogged up. And the whole thing's run from like a little small remote. So basically you can set it to run for 2 hours at whatever speed you want, and then you kind of just set it and forget it. So if I'm kind of here for the evening, I set it for 4 hours on medium, and I just let it run, and that way it's going long after I'm finished, and then it'll just shut itself off. So in that sense, it's pretty handy. I'll get a little closer up here. I'll grab the camera. Okay, so here is the front side where it's pulling in the air, and you can see it's definitely got its share of dust collecting in it. So it's due for a little blowout. And here's the back side. I can get a little bit better of a picture. And that's where it's kind of blowing the air. So you can see it's actually a little bit of dust around where it's blowing, so it's a good sign that it's probably could use a cleaning where some stuff is getting through at this point. That's probably up next on my list, is to take the filters out and either replace, or I'll try blowing them out first to see if I can get some more life out of them. One of the other options to the ceiling mounted fan like I have, and really quite an affordable option, is to just basically buy a furnace filter from your local hardware store. Build a square box that fits the furnace filter on one side, and buy a box fan for the other side. And basically the same principle is have it pull the air through that filter, and then you can just either take the filter out, blow it off with an air hose outside, or replace the filters. And just that, to get that circulation happening, have it pulling in air and grabbing it in the filters will make a huge difference in the breathability in your shop. And even, you kind of, you start to learn things as you go, and depending on the woods you use, you start to learn that it's really not great to breathe this stuff in, especially, when you get into walnuts, and I find even Purple Heart. It's probably not the best stuff to always have, that you're always inhaling all the time. So, it's worth kind of investing. It's kind of one of those things that I call unfun investments. So, cleaning the air in your shop isn't a whole lot of fun to put money into, but it's one of those things that you really got to start thinking about. And to me, honestly, like for your health and longevity, it's worth putting a few bucks into it. Even though it's like not as cool as buying a new saw or some new cordless tool that's awesome, it's worth putting the extra bucks. And the other thing I'd say is buy a face mask with filters. It's well worth it. If you're doing a lot of sanding, working on the lathe is really bad, I find. Probably because of the high speed of the rotation, then you're holding sandpaper against it as it spins. It kicks up at a massive amount of dust, and even with the dust collection going, there's just no way to keep up. So protect your lungs if you can. It's worth you're worth the investment. Let's put it that way. Safety gear is always worth the investment. It's the same thing. I think my dream is to someday get a saw stop, because it'd be nice to always have my 10 fingers. One of those kind of dream scenarios of always having fingertips, because as we all do, you get a little bit negligent as you're doing a lot of repeated cuts and stuff, and sometimes you think like, you have those moments where you think, ooh, that was a close one, or whatever it might be, and that's all it takes is a split second. So yeah, someday the dream is to own a saw stop, but that'll be a few years down the road, I'm guessing, before I can afford that kind of thing. Yeah, as always, thanks for checking out these videos. I'm trying to keep them regular as I can. Like to do some reviews on some small tools and things like that, because I always try to think of the practicality of smaller guys like us that are doing this. I don't have expensive tools. A lot of tools I have are the you know, really the starter range tools. Now, the only exceptions to that probably is like the lathe I bought. I started with a small lathe that I got off Kijiji, which would be like, you know, the Canadian Craigslist, and, you know, put money aside from selling stuff, sold the little guy, and bought like a floor model lathe. But it's a Craftex lathe. It's from Busy Bee Tools here in Canada, which is, you know, it's a sub-brand Chinese. It's basically Grizzly for Canada is Craftex. It's same factory, except that we get gray paint and Grizzly gets green. That's really the only difference you'll find from the tools. King is pretty similar, which King is very popular in Canada. I believe you can buy King in the US as well. Yeah, so most of the stuff I buy is pretty much on the affordable range, we'll say, of things. I don't have any of the you know, deluxe tools here at all in the shop, but maybe someday that'll change. Like maybe someday I can scrimp up enough for something nice. But, you know, the stuff I have works, and, you know, I'm kind of, you know, not going in the hole buying tools, and that's what's important to me. I try to build enough stuff to, you know, sell that I can actually put the money back into tools, and that's what I'll keep doing, is just keep picking away until I get everything I need. And it makes, you know, every new tool makes doing those same tasks a little bit easier each time, so it's well worth the investment. Yeah, so I hope you guys are getting some time in your shops, and, you know, hope you're doing well and staying safe at it. And I'm very interested to know on, you know, any little things you guys have done as far as keeping it pure. I guess my heater's just coming on here if you hear that noise start up. Yeah, I'm always curious to hear how you guys are keeping dust under control in your shops, and if there's any kind of tricks of the trade you've learned. You know, please comment, because I think we all could, you know, benefit by helping each other out. And if we learn something good, like, you know, share the good news, I always say. Yeah, so take care, everyone. Thanks again. Thanks for checking out the channel, and have a great day in your shop. Take care.